She enters with a calm that soothes the room. But her stillness isn't peace, it's armor. Behind her eyes lies a landscape shaped by abandonment, betrayal, and survival. You believe you're stepping into something fresh. But in truth, you're stepping into a role precast long before your arrival, a continuation, not a beginning. Every man who engages with a woman past her threshold of heartbreak, a woman who has known motherhood, loss, or simply too many shattered hopes, must grasp a sobering reality. You're not building something from scratch. You're walking into the wreckage of a cathedral once meant to last forever. And without knowing it, you're expected to play both savior and architect. You call it love. She calls it redemption, but it's neither. What unfolds is often a subtle form of compensation, where your devotion is weighed against the damage she carries, and your patience is tested like currency. You believe endurance proves commitment, but sometimes it's just self-abandonment, bending yourself to fit the template of someone who confuses connection with control and intimacy with emotional outsourcing. As Jung would say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Her past isn't in the past, it's in the room with you. And while you think you're offering presence, she's offering projection, turning your warmth into a proving ground for wounds that aren't yours to heal. Conflict becomes ritual, tenderness becomes trial, and when the dynamic finally exhausts, she reframes it. You were never strong enough. But what's happening here isn't just personal, it's archetypal. It echoes across relationships, institutions, and even this platform. The algorithm doesn't reward inner work, it favors spectacle, not silence. Illusion over initiation. Why? Because awakening doesn't sell well. It doesn't entertain. It disturbs. And what disturbs cannot be easily monetized. This channel, this digital sanctuary, might one day vanish, not from censorship, but from irrelevance in a culture addicted to anesthesia. But even if the lights go out, the vision remains. What has been unveiled can't be undone, and once you've stepped out of the script, going back becomes impossible. So we'll adapt, not cling. We'll speak through different frames, different mouths, different codes. But the essence, the call to inner sovereignty, remains. If this message doesn't resonate, let it pass. But if it strikes something, if it touches a bruise you've been ignoring, don't dismiss it. You're not here to argue. You're here to remember. The feminine wound wants to make you a bandage, but your role was never to be used. It was to witness, to discern, to choose. This isn't just my voice, it's yours. It belongs to the men waking up from the trance of blame, the men who mistook chaos for passion, who gave everything to something that fed off their confusion. It belongs to the man who now sees the machinery behind the mask, and dares to walk away from what was never his to carry. If you're watching this, it's because something inside you finally snapped. You're not just tired, you're done. Done being the understudy in a drama you never auditioned for. Done being the reward for someone who's already played out the story in her mind and cast you in the role of repairman, redeemer, and emotional landfill. This is your wake-up call, because the fantasy of being the one who fixes it all is the first lie men learn to swallow, and it's laced with poison. The savior complex isn't noble, it's a form of self-erasure. You think you're choosing her, but really, you're walking into an emotional debt she expects you to pay in full. With interest, every woman who has crossed a certain threshold of disappointment, whether through age, motherhood, or fractured illusions, carries an unspoken script. A script where you arrive not as a man, but as a symbol. The apology the universe never gave her. The father figure who finally stays. The emotional mule who won't collapse under the weight of her unresolved grief. But that expectation, it isn't love. It's a form of quiet pathology. You're not being seen. You're being used as a narrative device to justify her pain, to validate her choices, to help her believe that the past wasn't a mistake, but it was. And pretending otherwise won't save either of you. She asks for stability but triggers chaos. She claims to seek depth but punishes intimacy. She warns you not to become like the others, but then reenacts the same psychic theater that turned those men into ghosts. It's not about you, it's about what you represent. And the more you try to show up, the more you're punished for. Not being able to rescue what was broken before you arrived. Psychoanalysis is brutal in its clarity. Unprocessed wounds repeat themselves compulsively, ritualistically. She didn't mourn. She fortified. She took pain and turned it into identity. She wrapped her child in armor, memorized affirmations, rehearsed independence, all to defend a self that never felt truly chosen. You think you're building a relationship, but you're inside a test, measured against a phantom X, an idealized man who doesn't exist, and a version of herself that's more performance than presence. This isn't partnership. It's survival masquerading as romance. What she really wants isn't companionship, it's containment. Someone to absorb the overflow of a storm she doesn't know how to quiet. A man who funds the peace she refuses to find within. Who absorbs the cold, the criticism, the silence, and still thanks her for the opportunity. And if you falter, if you ask for reciprocity, suddenly you're selfish, you're weak, you're just like the rest. Not because it's true, but because the illusion must be protected at all costs. You become the next cautionary tale. The next proof that men can't handle strong women, that real men are extinct, that she's too much only for the unworthy, but beneath the posturing is despair, not fake, not superficial, but deeply structured, built from years of deferred grief, temporary highs, romantic confusion, and spiritual exhaustion, now rebranded as empowerment and the unconscious. It never forgets. It doesn't need logic. It needs repetition. And that's what you are now. The latest echo in a tragedy she never processed, never named, and now plays out in slow motion. Frame by frame. She doesn't want healing. She wants vengeance, dressed as connection. And you're the emotional target. Not because you're guilty, but because you're available. This is not a call to hate. It's a call to see. To wake up from the trance of overfunctioning. To remember that love without truth is just glorified self-sacrifice. You're not here to be consumed. You're here to become conscious. And once that happens, there's no going back. You're not rescuing her. You're being absorbed into a narrative where affection is currency, and your role is transactional. In this story, love is no longer sacred. It's a subtle form of servitude. And unless you wake up, you'll end up paying the emotional bill for traumas that never belonged to you. Worse, you'll convince yourself this is intimacy, but it's not. It's erosion. The second psychic distortion lives in a different realm. The elevation of the child as the new center of erotic energy. In the case of many women past a certain age, especially single mothers, there's often an unconscious transfer of desire. The man who failed is gone, and in his absence, the son becomes the symbolic heir to her unmet needs. No, it's not sexual, it's symbolic. but don't mistake subtlety for innocence. This dynamic isn't intentional, but it's total. It shapes the atmosphere of the relationship before you even speak. What you think is a romantic union is actually a triangle. You and her child, both positioned as objects in a system built around unsatisfied longing. Asterisk, you'll feel it, not in words, but in resistance. You'll speak and feel ignored. You'll guide and be accused. You'll love and be treated as a trespasser. Because you are. Not to the child, but to the myths she built around him. The child isn't just loved. He's sanctified, protected with a manic vigilance, rewarded for simply existing, not because of who he is, but because of what he compensates for. He's the proof that her suffering wasn't meaningless, that her abandonment didn't destroy her, that she's still in control. But Freud warned us, the unconscious doesn't bury mistakes, it reenacts them, and when desire becomes guilt, it always looks for a place to hide. In this case, behind the innocent face of a child who now carries the emotional weight of a grown man, you enter with sincerity. She calls it intrusion. You offer guidance. She calls it ignorance. You step back. She says you're not ready for a real woman. But this was never about you. This is about maintaining a system where the man remains subordinate, not just to her, but to the child, who has now inherited the emotional throne. You're not a partner, you're a threat, and your very presence challenges the sacred imbalance. She's worked so hard to justify. There are unspoken rules. Don't correct too much. Don't bond too deeply. Don't question the hierarchy. You're not there to lead. You're there to comply, to smile on cue, to provide support, but never to interfere with the silent pact between mother and child. It's not motherhood. It's martyrdom in disguise. In this distorted order, the child becomes the symbolic husband. The man becomes a visitor in his own home, and she becomes the solitary heroine who does it all, not because she must, but because it validates her. Story, I don't need anyone, I'm enough. But behind that declaration is chaos. She says she craves connection, but when real partnership knocks, she arms herself. She builds walls made of bedtime routines, school schedules, and trauma narratives, not to protect the child, but to preserve the bond she doesn't want challenged. It's not love that drives her. It's fear of being displaced, and that fear manifests as sabotage, subtle, constant, corrosive. You'll be blamed for caring too much, for asking questions, for daring to take space, not because your actions are wrong, but because they disrupt a psychic economy where she trades emotional validation for absolute control in the end. Your love will be reinterpreted as danger, your care reframed as coercion, and your desire, once welcomed, will be recast as a threat to the very illusion she calls balance. You're not competing with a child. You're competing with her own unresolved longing, now projected onto the one person who can't leave her, her son, and that is not instinct. That's a psychological inversion, a spiritual collapse dressed as motherly devotion. While you're envisioning a home, she's guarding a shrine. And in that sacred architecture of denial, you are not a builder, you are a risk. She doesn't want to co-create love. She wants to protect the illusion. And if you refuse to bow, you won't be confronted. You'll be erased, quietly, strategically, inevitably. The third unseen fracture, repressed erotic guilt, in many women beyond 30, especially those who carry the weight of single motherhood. There exists a silent war between past indulgence and present identity, a rupture between the body that once said yes freely, and the soul now desperate to appear untouched. She once moved through desire with autonomy. Without apology, she sought pleasure as freedom. But now, in the aftermath, she seeks reverence. She wants to be seen as pure, stable, sanctified. The contradiction isn't confessed. It's exiled and then projected. She presents herself as emotionally available, spiritually mature, finally ready for something real. But beneath the surface lives a residue, a psychic echo of choices made in flesh, but never metabolized in meaning. And that echo whispers in every interaction. Psychoanalysis is unrelenting. What remains unprocessed returns in disguised form. And in her case, it returns as subtle hostility toward the masculine, not loud, not obvious, but corrosive. The man must now atone, not for who he is, but for the ghosts she carries. He becomes the emotional scapegoat, judged not for his present, but for a past he never lived. She may speak of peace, but her actions are trials. Her standards are defense mechanisms. Every offer you make is interrogated. Every compliment becomes a test. Every touch is weighed against an invisible scale of punishment. Because deep down, you're not a partner. You're a stand-in for the guilt she refuses to claim. She says she has no regrets. But her behavior reveals the opposite, in small punishments, in cold silences, in demands that seem endless. You're not dealing with a woman seeking connection. You're inside a courtroom where love has been replaced with penance. Why? Because acknowledging the cost of her freedom would mean facing the parts of herself she's tried to bury, the men she gave herself to with abandon, the nights she thought would liberate her, but left her emptier. The power she once wielded now feels like a burden, and rather than grieve that story, she rewrites it through you. Now she wants devotion, purity, structure. She wants to be adored as worthy, as untouched, as if the past never happened. But the unconscious doesn't forget, it reenacts. So even when she tries to play the role of the one who's ready, the unresolved returns. And the tragedy, you could give her everything, your loyalty, your truth, your care, and it still wouldn't be enough, because she's not seeking love, she's seeking redemption. But the redemption must come from within, and until it does, you'll be the one punished for sins you never committed. She will distrust every gift, deconstruct every praise, undermine every safe space you try to create, not because you failed her, but because she failed herself, and can't bear to admit it. The need is not for a partner, it's for purification. She wants to be seen as untouched, while living with the memory of having touched. Everything she wants your reverence, to overwrite her own shame, but you can't rewrite her story, and if you try, you'll lose your own. The distance between her lived experience and the purified image she clings to has become unbearable. So she rewrites history, not for you, for herself. And that lie becomes the invisible spine of the relationship. You are not allowed to challenge it. If you try, you'll be shamed, labeled as insensitive, misogynistic, or emotionally immature. She says she wants to start fresh, but insists on dragging every broken chapter with her. She wants real love, adult love, soul love, but demands it through the emotional lens of an abandoned teenager. And if you're not careful, you won't be a man to her. You'll become her prosthetic, a tool to keep walking without ever addressing the wounds that made her limp in the first place. Fourth, hidden distortion. Control disguised as healing. When a woman over 30, shaped by loss and sculpted by regret, hasn't metabolized her past, control becomes her new religion. She doesn't seek connection, she seeks containment. Not of you, but of her own fear. This need to control isn't simply behavioral, it's existential. It's the unconscious attempt to manage the unmanageable, her own inner disorder. So she tells you how to love her, how to speak to her, how to feel. She teaches you how to become the man who will never hurt her, but also never truly live beside her. Every action must conform to the script she wrote in silence. A script where you're the proof that she's finally won, that she's not the girl who chose wrong, that the pain didn't define her. She demands your transparency, every thought, every move, every scar, but her own remains locked behind walls. She shares fragments, never the core. You are exposed, she is sacred. You are questioned, she is unquestionable. This is not intimacy, it's emotional surveillance. Psychoanalysis tells us when trauma isn't integrated, it returns as an obsession with control. The wound speaks, not with pain, but with protocols. She thinks if she just controls enough, she can eliminate pain. But in doing so, she also eliminates love. Because desire, by nature, is wild, mysterious, volatile, and real love doesn't emerge in safety, it emerges in risk, and you slowly morph into a role. An emotional technician, a stability machine, a placeholder for her peace. You can't afford flaws. One missed call is abandonment. A sigh is passive aggression. A joke is humiliation. Fatigue is now a red flag. Your humanity is constantly translated through the filter of her unresolved pain. So you walk on eggshells in a house where there is no earthquake, only the memory of one. You adapt, you shrink, until you're no longer a man, but a mechanism. This control isn't rooted in hate, it's rooted in terror. But because that fear is unacknowledged, it's outsourced to you, to the world, to the next mistake she's already prepared for. She anticipates betrayal. She wants to trust, but can't let go of the narrative that says all men eventually fail. So even your love becomes a ticking clock. She's watching, waiting, bracing for the crash, and in doing so, she causes it. This isn't relationship, it's choreography. She wants predictability, certainty. A man who follows the script never deviates, never surprises her. A man who makes her feel safe, but not one who brings chaos, challenge, shadow, growth. But you aren't predictable. You are not a script. You are not a system. You are a man. And to truly love you, she would have to surrender her control. She would have to trust the fire as well as the comfort, the shadow as well as the light. And that is the one thing she cannot yet do. The more alive you are, the more she tried to sculpt you, not out of cruelty, but fear. Because your humanness, your unpredictability, your emotion, your shadow, reminds her of a past she never digested. And in her world, the past isn't something that ended. It's something that haunts. So she will prune you gently at first, then ruthlessly. Your strength will feel invasive. Your questions will seem like threats. Your natural frustration, framed as failure to love. Because in the mythology she's living, there's room for only one main character, the wounded self on a quest to rewrite history. And you're cast as a proof of concept, a stand-in to validate that this time, finally, the ending will be different. But love cannot grow where fear is king. And she fears everything. Fear of giving in, fear of being seen, fear of becoming the fool again. So she grasps for control. But control doesn't bond, it binds, it cages. And if you're not awake, not grounded in your own center. You'll find yourself imprisoned in a version of love that feels more like house arrest. Because she doesn't just want affection, she wants authority over herself, over the story, over you. What she truly longs for is peace. But she's convinced herself that peace means eliminating every trace of unpredictability. And you, the masculine, you are unpredictable. You are desire, boundary, disruption, intensity. You are what she both craves and fears. So she tries to domesticate you, to soften you, to tame the masculine, not because it's dangerous, but because it reminds her of what she lost, her own ability to trust. But in taming you, she silences you. And in silencing you, she kills everything that love requires. Truth, polarity, tension, surrender, aliveness. Fifth hidden distortion, the unconscious addiction to collapse. Behind every performance of resilience, every carefully curated image of a strong woman overcoming the odds, lies something darker, a private contract with suffering, not as a phase, as an identity. Pain, for her, is more than familiar. It's sacred, because from pain she draws meaning. From chaos she draws worth. From victimhood she builds her power, not real power, but the kind that demands recognition through perpetual misfortune. Freud named it long ago. There is pleasure in the symptom, and this is the final trap. She doesn't fear failure, she feeds on it, because success threatens the very story she lives inside. When things go well, she panics. When you show up consistently, she grows cold. When you love deeply, she tests you, not to confirm your love, but to destabilize it, because real intimacy reveals the illusion. And she needs the illusion more than she needs the relationship. She doesn't want peace. She wants drama with poetic justification. Her heartbreak becomes her sermon. Her disappointment becomes proof that she loved too much, that she's too deep, too loyal, too real, while never once confronting the core truth. She manufactures what she claims to survive, so you become the next chapter in a long-running emotional opera. And the more you try to rescue her, the more she casts you as the villain, because to heal would mean letting go of the one thing she still controls, the narrative of endless wounding. And in that narrative, your love is not nourishment. It's a threat to the identity she built from the ashes, because deep down, what she truly needs is for the story of the incapable man to never die. That's the real addiction, not to love, not to healing, but to the narrative of failure. A script she can't stop performing, one where the ending is always the same: disappointment, distance, disillusion. Only now it's performed with elegance. Poetic quotes, curated vulnerability, tattoos that speak of rebirth while repeating the same tragedy dressed in more aesthetic lies. The choreography is predictable: connection, testing, provocation, collapse, blame. And you, if you're not conscious, become just another actor in her inner mythology. She already fell once, maybe more than once, and because she never truly faced the fall, she's condemned to repeat it, but on her terms this time. That's why she chooses men with integrity, so she can prove, in the end, that even the good ones fail. That's not coincidence. That's ritual, a symbolic vengeance, not against you, but against the unmet longing within her, against her own hunger for desire, against the freedom that betrayed her, against herself. You think you're being wronged. You're not. You're being used, not as a man, but as a metaphor, an emotional placeholder to justify why nothing ever lasts. She doesn't want peace. She wants proof that she was always the one who gave too much, who felt too deeply, who tried too hard. even as she sabotages you quietly, steadily, subconsciously. Take that story away from her, and the entire architecture of meaning collapses. That's why she must keep failing. That's why she pushes, then pulls, accuses, then weeps. That's why everything you build gets quietly set on fire with a smile. Because you're not in a relationship. You're in a recurring myth where love is the threat, and pain is the only proof of authenticity. Love terrifies her, because love demands exposure. It demands presence. It requires that she dismantled the altar she built to protect herself, but her identity was constructed inside that trauma. And if she loses it, she risks losing everything. Now, you see, you didn't fail her. You just weren't playing the role she needed to keep the pain alive. She never wanted to build something new. She wanted to repeat the ending, to confirm what she already believes, that all men leave, all love rots, and suffering is the only constant. This is not bitterness. This is not blame. This is masculine clarity. Through the lens of psychoanalysis, we begin to see the deeper truth, that what masquerades as empowerment is often just avoidance. What's called choice is sometimes the repetition of unprocessed wounds. What's painted as independence is emotional exile. That's why we're building a space outside this fragile platform, beyond the reach of censorship, performance, and shallow dialogue. A private community for men who seek truth, not slogans, not posturing, not emotional codependence in disguise. A space for sovereign minds, for those who study the psyche, who understand symbolic warfare, who don't beg for validation, but earn clarity through confrontation. This channel may disappear, but the movement is already alive, and it cannot be undone. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. This isn't a sermon. It's an arsenal. No saviors, no martyrs. Only men becoming aware. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and, if you're ready, follow us into the next layer. The next step is yours.